Good day, everyone. Wanted to thank all the participants who registered and are tuning into the session today for making the time. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Coach and Ashok, for carving out time from your schedules to be with us today and talk about a topic that is extremely pertinent for the current times. I'm looking forward to learning from all of you over the course of the session today. Would request everyone tuning in to post their sessions in the chat section below. Now moving to the topic of the day, right? Now, there's been enough discussion about digital already over the course of the last year and a half. One thing is clear that there's been an acceleration of the digital agenda across companies. It is not as if digital was not a priority in the years before, right? But suffice to say that 3-4 years worth of shift in thinking in terms of digital has happened last year. But important to note that large parts of the digital efforts last year were as a reaction or a response to the crisis. How do you enable employee safety and health? How do you do COVID-related BCP? How do you ensure productivity and engagement while being remote, etc. Right? Now, after a year, companies are thinking about igniting growth despite the disruption, and how digital will importantly become an important pillar in that regard going forward. Note again the distinction. A company's digital strategy now is no longer a reactionary measure like last year, but a cornerstone of their business strategy for driving their growth agenda going forward. With that sort of context, I wanted to turn to Kush first. Kush, you have this very unique vantage point where you see digital as a pillar across companies and sectors. It will be great to hear from you on how our priorities have changed around digital since last year and that digital trends that you noticed across the market.
Thanks for that. I think, I mean, you actually put it very well in your introduction. There has been, so I've been watching this space very closely for the last 6 or 7 years now. And there is a very clear inflection point that we seem to have witnessed. It is both an acceleration. So I would say it's somewhere between a 3 to 5 year acceleration of efforts. That's just a completely, I would say sort of a random approximation, but I think it broadly contends with what other industry observers are saying. And there's an expansion in terms of the kinds of opportunities that are being considered by people. And like you said, while a lot of last year was spent reacting, now that people are back to the growth agenda, they are looking much more expansively at the kinds of ideas. And that includes ideas that had been previously written off. So, there's been a lot written about recently about the revival of the hyperlocal delivery models, which at one point had kind of, it doesn't really work. And now people have learned how to do it well and are doing it. There's a second attempt happening. Same thing with traditional companies. There are a lot of things around, for instance, e-commerce that had been tried and, had settled into some kind of a model now, and people are talking a lot more about platforms and so on. I think there are 3 factors that have contributed to this, right? And let's talk about that, and then we can talk about what's happened. The first, I think, is that people were forced to reinvent the core, right? Because of the pandemic, like a pharma company couldn't send a sales rep anymore to meet the doctor. So what do you do?
Right.
Not do anything. What do you do in this? How do you use this time? Do you just wait? You let somebody else do something? Or an auto company, showrooms are closed. So do you completely now, what do you do? How do you sell? There was almost like a forced reinvention of the core in most sectors, in sectors, particularly in sectors which were previously not forced to reinvent their core. So things like financial services and media, they had kind of already seen this, in a sense, forced reinvention of the core that had been happening over a few years. And they were already doing it. Many of them have been doing it, but there were sectors that were previously untouched by this. And that, I think, they were suddenly given a preview of what it is.
Right.
If you look at how Ola has been selling their electric vehicles now,
absolutely,
it's a different reinvention of the auto model, right? So every auto company, this idea had been, there's not a new idea. It's the idea right. Thought about, right? But no one had been forced to actually do it. So that's one. The second, I think, is that there has been a glut of capital, right? Chasing tech-enabled ideas. We know this. This is a global phenomenon, and we are, the tech industry here is a beneficiary of that. And everyone is looking at that and suddenly seeing that if I want to attract capital, I need to do something distinctive and I need to do something digital. And if we do it, then we will also be able to attract capital. So that's a necessary driving factor as well. And I think the third factor is the availability of talent, experienced talent. I think for 4 or 5 years, people have been cooking ideas, doing experiments, traditional companies, new companies, startups. So there is now a critical mass of talent that can actually do and build these things. So if you put all these three things together, you have a nice, you have a nice enabling conditions for actually doing big new digital things. And that has translated into, my sense, acceleration of existing big initiatives, big initiatives, agri-tech, food tech,
Absolutely.
new areas, new space, not just financials, not just fintech and media tech, which was sort of
not easy areas, and not
the easy areas, things which really require reinvention, and an expansion of ideas which to include things which were previously thought as, oh, well, this won't really scale or this won't really happen, a revisit and re-examination of some of those things by traditional companies. So that to me is what I'm actually seeing.
Excellent, amazing. And Matthew, coming to you, we know that all of us know Crompton as a 100-year-old brand, but I think Crompton Greaves in the consumer avatar is only 6 years old. And what role do you see digital transformation playing in your company?
Yeah, you're right. I think while we have a 85-year-old brand, the company its current avatar is only about 6 years old. So obviously, when we looked at the situation 6 years ago, I think we had to make I would say, an overall business transformation. Right. The good thing was the company was doing well, and it was not a question of having to turn around anything, but more how do you take a company which is performing somewhere in the mid-level to being a real top performer in the industry. So the real task in front of us was actually business transformation. And we said business transformation using digital or technology as an enabler. That's how we look at digital transformation itself. The end being, how do we really improve our business going forward? And I'll just like to share a few examples of how and where we felt this could be of great benefit. Crompton, as you also said, is a very old brand, 85-year-old brand, has, for example, a very good connect with end consumers, and especially the older age group. So when we were looking to start to transform the business and take it to the next level, we identified basically 5 pillars, on how we will transform our business. And obviously the first one was brand, because while the brand was strong, and I always say brand is like a bank account. You can keep drawing from it, but if you don't put back anything into it, at some point of time, it'll become overdrawn and it'll no longer be useful. And for a period of time, the Crompton brand had been underinvested in. So we had to start to reinvent the brand, especially to build a better connect with the younger audience. Okay. So a few things were happening. The younger audience was much more internet and digital savvy. Okay. And just giving you some numbers, in our category, electrical consumer durables, typically till about a couple of years ago, roughly only about 10 to 20% of the consumer decision were digitally influenced. Doesn't mean they're going to buy in digital, but some part of the consumer journey is in the digital space. The expectation is in the next couple of years, that would become 2/3. So 2/3 of the journey would become digitally influenced, especially with the younger audience coming in. So I think one of the core skills the company had to build, one was, of course, understanding this consumer journey. Second, the ability to mine these insights, because when the consumers come online, they leave a wealth of information there.
Right.
How do you really start to mine? That's a new capability you need to build. Okay.
Absolutely.
The third part of that is how do we really then, once you mine the information, what consumers are leaving behind, the way they search, the way consumer journey moves online, offline, how do we really start to build tools to influence them at various points in these? So I think that's a whole set of new skills that the company had to develop, because 5 years ago, most companies in our space never considered this, the online journey as of critical importance. We thought that many companies thought this would take many years to come. Okay. Right. So that's one. So in the brand space, it's all about, understanding this consumer journey, looking at how it happens online, how do we ensure stickiness online. So if the whole purchase process also happens online, how do we get there?
Absolutely.
But sometimes, a big chunk even today and expected also in the next couple of years, partially online and partially offline. So how do we still have a seamless journey going forward? So digital plays a big role in this whole area. Yes. Second one, we were transforming to a consumer company. We were earlier part of a B2B enterprise which had a small consumer business. So obviously one is, we always felt the differentiator going forward was to build, a strong innovation engine. Okay. And there comes multiple areas where we felt digital could play a significant role. One I already mentioned is how can I mine insights from what I get online? People searching on e-com sites and other sites for products, the reviews they leave online is a fantastic source of information which we never had access to or never looked at 5 years ago. The second is we collect a lot of insights through our own unique processes, focus group. One thing is how do we create a repository of this information, which we can draw on at any point of time? Because typically when people move, we always found that the knowledge goes with them. So how do we create a repository? Second is how do we have the entire innovation process of the company? For example, I would say roughly 10 to 15% of our business every year comes from products launched in the last 12 months. And about half our business comes from products launched in the last 3 years. So the entire innovation engine, how do we manage seamlessly, to ensure that we either we are able to take the learnings forward, or those do either we fail fast and those get dropped quickly, and then at the top level we have visibility in the company, the different category of projects, the big size, the disruptive ones, how they are being pushed through the funnel. Now we are able to see the whole thing on a dashboard in the company, real time. So that I think is another area. The second part of that is, people talk about a lot about smart, IoT and so on and so forth.
Correct.
So how do we use digital to basically influence the fundamental consumer experience? When we hear smart, many people think of, can I just operate my fan on a mobile? I mean, that I don't think is really smart. Or if I can switch on my geyser when I leave the office, so that when I reach home, after struggling through the traffic, it's ready for me to take hot water bath. I mean, that I think is very basic. The way what we are talking about is, the geyser could learn, for example, on every weekday, all the family members take bath at this time. So and they like water at this level of temperature. So can you have a geyser that learns? So bringing technology. So once having, unearthed the consumer insight, how do you apply technology? So that's the other part. The other couple of more big areas I will focus on. Third one is, go to market. We have always been a traditional wholesale company. So two things were happening. And one was the slow evolution of e-com. Okay.
Right.
The last 2 years has completely, I would say, accelerated the switch. What we thought would take 10 years now happening in 2 years. So how do we build the capability internally to be able to work with e-com players? That's one. Second, if I link back with what I mentioned earlier, we have people searching for fans and lights all across the country.
Right.
So for example, if I find a consumer searching for a premium fan, somewhere say from Vijayawada, how can I then, instead of waiting for him to go to some shop and, get convinced to buy something else, when I know that he's searching for a fan in Vijayawada, how do I proactively use that information and then marry it with my offline structure to deliver products and services to him that he might require? So to building that capability. Even in traditional trade, earlier 5 years ago, we had no information. Today, we built information. For example, I know where my distributors are selling, to which stores, how much are they selling, which products are they selling. My entire, sales force has been automated. So I know exactly how many people are on the beach, at which point, how much time are they spending per call, and so on and so forth. I think the situation has come that we have a lot of information. I think the challenge today is how do we really, when information becomes an overload, everybody's happy because I know I have all that I need. But the question today, for the challenge for us today, and that's what we're going to focus going forward, how do we really mine this information to build competitive advantage? And as a company, one of the areas which we think is going to be for us very critically important to build competitive advantage going forward is how do I, all the data infrastructure that I built in the last 5 years, how do I create real competitive advantage from that? That's the key challenge going forward. And there are many more areas where we think data and technology can play a big role. It could also be in planning, in the factories, in managing our people. For example, right from the time even before they join the company, all the time till they exit, learning and development online. It has been expedited during this period of pandemic. How do we build the whole platform online in terms of so that they don't have to come to a classroom to learn. They could learn at their own leisure. But you're also able to qualify whether they are learning by doing the adequate testing. Even for example, when a salesman goes into a store, I today have a methodology available by when he's in the store. I can take him through the process. Okay, this store, what did he buy the last time? What should you propose to him today? Look at the stocks of XYZ. So you're able to manage the call within the store. So there are plenty of opportunities. So that's, I would say, even today, with all that we have done in the last 5 years, I think we are very early in this journey. So that's what I would put. I think plenty of opportunities, but we still need to do a lot to be able to harness the power of all this. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. And now moving to Ashok. Ashok, I think when we chatted last week, I think, and you are at the helm of this manufacturing giant globally, 65,000 employees, 100 odd countries. We talked about how, despite what happened last year, you were able to maintain the same consistent employee experience, employee journeys across, right, in all that diversity. Will be super nice to hear from you on how you were able to leverage technology to drive or maintain this consistent experience globally.
Thank you so much for this question. I think very relevant in the current times that we are staying, not only for a company like Schindler, which is multinational, but also even Indian conglomerates which are present worldwide. This is probably a very relevant question as well. Now, there are two parts to this question, I feel. One is, how are we managing HR technology or digitization of human resources to get the best human capital output? But I also feel that there is a non-digital component that I would like to answer as well. So let me start with the first part of it. Now, we are present over 100 countries, and the best part of our organization, Schindler, and I think many other organizations as well, is we are to a large extent decentralized, and we run like independent organizations within each country, which means, I get a lot of freedom within India to run the organization and to do the things that we need to do based on the requirements of the country. So, for example, if we want to talk about worldwide, how are we digitizing the organization? We are on a phase now of looking at the whole employee life cycle, right from a person joining the organization to a person leaving the organization. How can we digitize the whole spectrum? Because what we have done is we have introduced along these whole value chain of recruitment to exiting, we have done a whole lot of digitization in between, but not as an end-to-end. So now we are working on an end-to-end part. Now, the things that we are using, of course, is the age-old tested psychometric tools, which has been present for a long time. Now we're even using Telocity, which is more of an AI-based tool where you can actually place people who are, let's say, for example, we are recruiting for a salesperson. We can actually record on a video best salespeople's responses to standard questions, which becomes like a template answer. And then when you interview a person through the same technology, the technology will tell you the match of this person for the particular role. Now, that is a digital tool that we're using, and the one that we're using, starting to think about and starting to use as a pilot is Telocity. We use SuccessFactors predominantly for all the employee management part, right from performance reviews, development actions, development assignments, records, and stuff like that. But I would probably want to focus more importantly on the digitalization becomes effective when you have the right leadership in the organization, which I think is missed out a lot. Even recently, yesterday, I posted about how when you're trying to fix an organization, you don't start from bottom up. You can have the best HR digital tools. You can have the best data analyst, which we are, of course, using data analysis as well in the human resources domain. But if you have very poor leadership in the HR domain and in the organization as overall, then you have a big issue in terms of how will you even implement the digitization tools. Because when you have a varied experience of employees, right from Gen Millennials to Gen Ys to Gen X, you need to make sure that right leadership is in place, which will then drive the right digitization in the organization. See, today, the digitization thing has gone crazy, I would say, right? The kind of tools you have available, I'm even starting to feel that the whole human touch is going away. So whilst we would like to use more and more digital products in the human resources domain, I would still like to remind the audience that it all starts in the core of having the right leadership values from the top. Thank you so much, Jayant, for this wonderful question.
Thanks so much, Ashok, for sharing. And Kush, back to you. And all of us know that digital transformation journeys are not easy. And would love to hear from you on how companies can start thinking about executing a successful transformation exercise. How do you prioritize, focus energies? And importantly, while a lot of people talk about what you can do, right? What are the don'ts? What should you not do in a digital transformation exercise?
So this is an evolving space of learning, and I would say that my learning is only partial. A lot of companies are along the journey. Matthew probably has some, lots of examples which are comparable to what I might quote. But I'll just share my synthesis of some of the things that I've observed. I have a slide which I use this chalkboard font on normally, so it looks more natural when one changes it, and I keep erasing and adding things to it. So I think the most important thing is to start with a bold user-back aspiration for everything that one is doing. So, there'll obviously any management team that comes up with ideas will come up with 20, 30 ideas easily. All of them are, probably fairly impactful ideas. Maybe 5, 7 of them are transformational ideas. But whatever gets picked, and some teams pick just one thing to go after, some pick 2, some pick 3, one in the front end, one in manufacturing, one in supply chain. Companies will, depending on how much energy and enthusiasm they have for it, right? A management team will take up a certain number of ideas. But to me, the most important thing is that any one project or transformation that you take up needs to have a really bold aspiration, right? And that bold aspiration is in 2 forms. One is that it must transform the experience for the user, primary user and beneficiary of that transformation. So that user could be a consumer, it could be a dealer, it could be a salesperson, it could be somebody on a manufacturing shop floor, it could be a supplier, it could even be multiple participants, but whoever it is that needs to completely transform the experience. If you're not transforming the experience for that user, then you're going to miss out an opportunity, and you're probably going to have an initiative which somewhere along the way will lose its momentum. Just, may not be the case, but most, very empirically, that's the evidence. And the second way in which you measure what is bold is that what is the financial impact it's going to give. At the end of the day, we are not doing these for fun and for deploying some new tech or some cool ways of doing things. We're deploying them for financial impact. And the thumb rule that I use is that if the initiative is not going to at least lead to a 5% improvement in EBITDA or a 20% increase in enterprise value, then it's this is just a thumb rule. It's different for right. So in a 3 to 5 year time frame, which means if your company is valued at 10,000 crores today, you should at least do an initiative which creates another 2,000 crores of value, right?
Got that.
At least, right? Or if you're making 100 crores of EBITDA, you should at least have something which makes 5 crores of EBITDA, right? Understood. At least that should be the minimum threshold, nothing below that. And transformational, obviously, in terms of user experience, I already described. The second thing is that these initiatives, so this is the boldness of aspiration. The second thing is that these initiatives need to be resourced to deliver that. And one needs to have a resourcing plan that will help to deliver these initiatives. And the resourcing plan takes there's 2 elements to it. One is quantum. So, how much we need to put. So if I'm going to need to give you a 20% value creation or more, or I'm going to give you 5% EBITDA, that's not going to come for free. It's there's an investment. Usually the ROI or the IRR on these initiatives is amazing. When they work, they deliver IRRs higher than anything that any company would have ever seen, right? It's almost embarrassingly high numbers. Obviously, there's a risk with them. Sometimes they don't work. So that, I don't know if there's a risk-adjusted IRR, but for the IRR for the ones that work is incredible because the investments are relatively small, even with customer acquisition cost and change management cost and all that. Even then, the IRRs are actually quite significant. But there's also the quality of talent. So most of these initiatives require certain types of specialist talent. You need digital product managers, you need a design team who really understands the user and translates it back into tech requirements. You need scrum masters and people who can actually manage an agile process of development. You need data scientists very often to build algorithms which power a lot of these things. That talent, which comes very naturally to any startup in the space, doesn't come as naturally to large companies. The attempt is typically to take existing people and to get to repurpose them, and they learn things along the way, which is fine because existing people obviously know a lot of the current process, they understand the user best, but you need certain specialist talent. You can't do without that. So both the quantum of resource, right? So for instance, if I'm driving a big sales transformation, or if let's say I'm building a new platform to engage with my customer broadly. If I don't actually have dedicated Salesforce energy behind that, it's not going to take off. So I can't say that, now the same sales team, which already has a day job, will also now try to popularize my new platform. They can give you introductions, they can help you get in, but you need a dedicated sales energy to go behind it. And it's the same with marketing, right? That you have to spend on, if you want to doing a B2C platform, for instance, you're building a new platform, you got to spend behind building it. It won't just come on its own. So that's the resourcing piece, right? So bold aspiration followed by adequate quantum and specialist resourcing. Then you need to ring fence these initiatives and organize them in a way that they are set up for success. So typically the most successful transformations, you need some ring fencing, yet very close connections to the core. The most extreme examples are when you're setting up a completely new platform or business. Those need to be more ring fenced. When you're just transforming, let's say, your sales or transforming supply chain, you need to be closer to the business, but the initiative needs to be ring fenced so that the antibodies from the existing system, the anti-change, the agents don't attack it, right? It needs to be reviewed separately, have a leader who's separate, measured on certain KPIs. And by the way, the resourcing is not something that you decide once for 5 years and then you just blow up that money. You write it off. It's not like that. You invest in tranches, right? You invest in tranches, you see the results, and then you invest more. So that is to me, the three most important tenets. Then there are two very important mindset shifts that are required. Okay. One is agility. So agility is not about speed. People often misunderstand it to being about being fast. It's not. It's a mindset shift. Most managers are trained for, first time right. First time right is the enemy of agility. If you try to do things first time right, you will try to perfect things and try to build Taj Mahals where, Taj Mahal is not required. Only one minaret is required, maybe, or maybe one gate is required. But you need to put things out quickly and learn from the user, right? This is the core principle of agility. It's very against the DNA of seasoned managers. Because managers are taught to get things right first time, not to make mistakes, not to have to change things. Once you launch it, you should not have to change it, right? Those are things that are ingrained into behaviors, right? All of our behaviors. The second mindset shift is partnering, right? If something is available, right? If there's a company like yours, for instance, Jayant, which already has a bunch of solutions out there to transform, don't reinvent it, right? Take something. So again, large companies are actually, they love to build things themselves, get a SI, build a custom solution. Our requirements are different. This will be proprietary, etc., etc. That doesn't actually work. It goes against speed, right? If something is out there, take it over, use it. Then later, if you feel it's a source of intelligence, it's a source of proprietary, IP that can be a source of competitive differentiation, or you can get extra value from owning it, then build it, then take it over, build it, replace it with your own, right? We have many examples, by the way, where companies start up with outsourced modules and then we, in-source it later, right? That's absolutely possible to do. So that's so three big requirements for the setup, and then two important mindset shifts. The last mindset shift, by the way, is user obsession and user centricity, which I don't want to elaborate on. It's self-evident, but it's surprisingly uncommon amongst leadership teams. Everyone, if you poll somebody in a boardroom, everyone will say that they're customer-centric and user-centric. Nobody will say that they're not user-centric. But actually, the last time when any of the individuals spent time really understanding a user's needs and requirements and unmet needs was actually probably a long time ago. And therefore, this user centricity is something which has to be forced into the process, right? And the specialist talent plays some role in that. I'll stop. There are a few others, but I don't want to bore you with a long lecture. These are the most important things.
And the first point around not digital for the sake of digital, but be super clear about what you're trying to achieve. I think that was good. And when you talked about agility, that's a $1 trillion question, right? I think how can you still be agile as you scale? And we see that happening in Darwinbox already. At our scale, which is very, very small, we're 600 people, and we find ourselves becoming inagile as we speak. And we talk about that every month, and as a leadership group, how do we retain agility? What helped us come this far? How do you retain that going forward?
So you can imagine how difficult it is in a large company with
absolutely.
people, are also tuned to sort of hang on a little bit to what they've created.
Absolutely. And Matthew, I think Kush already called it out earlier, and what challenges did you face when you set out to transform Crompton Gives consumer, right? Yeah, your journey.
The goal for us was to transform the business. Okay, and I mentioned briefly that the business was already doing reasonably well. Okay, so the question always comes when something is not broken, why do you fix it? Okay, and that's one. The second thing is the company itself was transforming from what I would call is a family run or a entrepreneur owned company to a primarily board run, completely professionally managed company. So there were multiple changes that the people had to grapple with. So, what we tried to do is, of course, we clearly and simply called out the key 5 areas which will help transform the business. A few of which I covered before, which is one is brand excellence, innovation and portfolio excellence. Third is go-to-market excellence. Fourth is operational excellence. And fifth is people excellence. So we simply said 5 things because, the biggest danger in these things is try to make things too complex, because
Right.
think of the people in the company, they are now seeing one ownership change. A company which was for 70, I don't know how many years, 70 years, run in a certain way with the promoter at the top is now promoter has sold. You have private equity coming in as majority, or not majority, as key stakeholders, and you have at least 2 or 3 key managers who are coming new, and they're waiting and watching. So for us, the task was simply to tell them to make it clear that the first thing was to make it clear that the company is doing well, but we need to build on top, because the fact is a lot of competitors had come in and changed the rules of the game. Some of it which I had already mentioned. Many of them had invested in technology, in digital way ahead of us. Okay. Now,
Right.
having said all that, we were very clear that the transformation of the company, including the digital initiatives, had to be primarily led by the business leadership. The CIO's team was there to help provide the technical solution, but the leadership had to lead actual transformation. And we said any project that we do, and I very much resonate with what Kushe said in terms of there has to be a very clear business payoff. Okay, the only time we will do something, digital or non-digital, if there is no business payoff, is if there is a compliance requirement. Okay, that's a given. You don't need to, if you need to file your GST filing, you got to do it. You're not going to then calculate the monies for it. But everything else got to have a business payoff. And that would typically come from delivering the consumer a better experience so that you get more trials. It could come by delighting a customer by making it easier to do business with the company so that they prefer to do business with us than our competitors. Like some of the stuff I told you about, guiding the sales force to make them more effective. So, but I would say that even when the payoffs are clear, I think, habits and inertia is for a company like ours, which has been run a certain way for so many years, fairly successfully, is very difficult to change. Okay, for example, imagine a salesman who has built his reputation as one of the top salesmen in the industry by building excellent relationship with wholesalers.
Right.
So he knows how to strike the deal. He says, "I'm an A salesman. Leave it to me. I'll make it happen." So now you're telling him, okay, good. Keep all those skills intact, but now we are going to have everything transparent. You will have a beat. On every Monday, you will go here, you'll go there, you'll do 20 calls. Not only you'll do 20 calls, we will know when you start the first call. Okay. We know how much time you have taken on the first call. Did you do at 10 a.m. or did you do it at 2 p.m.? How much time you spent? Did you go through all the steps in the call? Did you make the sale happen? Did you sell all the SKUs, or what you did? When did you end the call? Everything becomes visible. I think the first thing that comes up is, we were asked this question by many of our employees. Hey, does that mean you don't trust us? Is the company going to snoop on us? Simple questions, because
Right,
we know exactly what's going to happen now. And they felt some of their core skills, which got them here, may become less relevant going forward. The challenge here is, to make it, to prove to them that actually their performance is going to be enhanced by what we are providing them.
Absolutely.
And we find it takes time. We have to be patient because we don't have the option of getting 1,500 people gone.
Yeah.
And getting new 1,500 people, because there is no guarantee. First, there is no guarantee the new ones are going to come in. Even if they come in from places where they have used this, are going to be able to successfully use it here, number one. Second is all the relationships and the skills that our guys had, which is still required, are gone. So it requires patience and repetition and repetition. And we find with more than 95% of people, it works. It works, but we have to give it enough time. 5% who never adapt or don't want to adapt, obviously find their way out of the company. But I think critical is, I would say, business ownership of the stuff. So
Absolutely.
The business owns the projects. The second one is not to have too many of them. If you have large number of small projects, one, they don't really get any traction. Nobody looks at them. Okay. Second, whether they fail or win is nobody's really bothered because there are thousands of them. So we said, we will only do 5-6 initiatives at a time. And we have an entire program called Urja. We just named it Urja because we thought Urja is a good name. So we had Urja 1, Urja 2. Urja 1 was, just because we had to implement SAP because we were dependent on the earlier company. They said, okay, you have 1 year to cut the umbilical cord. So do whatever you want. After 1 year, you're on your own. So first 1 year we spent, only making sure that when the umbilical cord gets cut, the business will not going to collapse. Okay. And that time SAP 4 HANA was coming in new. We were among the first companies to implement the full suite. So the focus was on doing that with minimal disruption, but making the business transformation we need, because it's going to be there for 5 years before we improve it again. So that's one. Urja 2 are again projects there are 5 or 6 projects in different areas. Each of them have called out a clear business benefit, which is then measured at the end. There's a project excellence lead, primarily a business leader who will head that project, with IT providing the backup. And we have what's called a steering committee which is of course, which consists all the senior leadership. We review those projects every month, providing resources as required, making the roadblocks, trying to remove the roadblocks. And sometimes, to be honest about it, many times we had to reset our own expectation, because sometimes we felt that it takes 3 months for all salespeople to start using all the data and be perfect.
Right.
We found after 3 months, many of them not even started logging in.
Absolutely.
So we learned on the way, because as you know, this is a very traditional company. So we have come a long way. But even if you ask me today, if I would rate ourselves 1 out of 10, then I would rate ourselves 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10 today. And that is being fairly liberalizing to myself, to myself and the company. But we have moved, and the people have started seeing the benefit. But one number I'll give you. If I have 100 pieces of information today, maybe I don't need 100. Okay, that's one thing we have figured out. Sometimes information overload is worse than no information, because people then make wrong use of information and use it only to give a new reason why they cannot do something. So one is, now we said we will only have X information.
Right.
Then second thing is to kill all other information. If you have a digital tool, people are still having their Excel sheets running in the background.
Right.
We have to kill that. Then third, we said, when we discuss with the teams, we will only use this dashboard. No PPTs, no new Excels, no fancy stuff, only these.
Absolutely.
And when we do that for 12 months, 18 months, I would say it starts to slowly become, order of the day. Yeah, but easier said than done. Even today, I would find going to a meeting and then suddenly a PPT pops up, and then I have to I have to hold myself back and say, hey guys, let's go to that dashboard. Many people are still not comfortable, but I would say, I think having spent 6 years here, I have become more, I would say, definitely more realistic. And the last thing I want to say on this point is again what Kushya said. I think that, when we pick 3 or 4 or 5 projects, the goals have got to be big. Yeah. And that's why I say a few number of large initiatives rather than many which eventually will make no difference. I think it's also important to ensure the teams remain focused and they get adequate attention. So that's all I would like to say on this.
I think extremely well put, Matthew. I think
interrupt, but just one small observation I wanted to just point out, right? If you hear Matthew speak, this is the marker of a company that's well on its way to the transformation, right? And there's 2 specific things of the language that change. One, priorities change, because he doesn't talk about digital priorities, but this is company priorities and strategic priorities, and these are all woven in there, right? So he doesn't distinguish that, and digital is some CDO is doing something, or
correct.
Priorities. And the second, he talks about behaviors.
Absolutely.
And that's true. So initially everyone thinks that this is all about some cool thing, tech, projects, but then soon it, it's transformation. At the end of the day, the fact that it's digital doesn't change the fact that it's transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you, one point. Initially, when we implemented all these tools in sales specifically, and we used to ask the salespeople, hey, you are growing 8%. Now you're projecting 15. How will it happen? The first answer was, sir, now we have all these digital tools. I said there are many companies who have done the digital tools before us, who are still growing only 8%. And they realize very quickly that just having that there changes nothing.
Like you don't become fit by having a Fitbit.
Correct. By just having a treadmill in front of you, you need to get on it.
And like you called out, driving this change at every level so that people think it's digital is actually an enabler. And Matthew, so like you so rightly said, starting from the top, if those behaviors don't get owned at the top, how will they flow down the hierarchy? They won't.
Absolutely.
And moving quickly on to Ashok, I think Kush talked about this. Matthew just articulated that beautifully. How will you drive, or how will you use digital, and how will you drive change in a manner that the workforce is in the best possible situation to leverage digital in the way it should? Your thoughts on that will be great.
Jayant, again, a very important, relevant question. When we're talking about helping the employees, I would say get into the whole digitization part and traversing through the whole path. And when you have a complex employee age cycle, right from young to senior experienced employees, what is more important is firstly sensitization. So number one is sensitizing the employees as to why are we introducing these tools, what is the benefits of these tools, and how they are not just about cost cutting. Because I think first doubt that everybody gets in their mind is, am I going to lose my job if I embrace this change? So we need to sensitize employees first. And then, of course, most important is training. And when I talk about training, it has to be, we have to make sure that these products are not very complicated. It has to be very, very user-friendly, simple to use. That's the kind of digital tools we should be adopting as well. Then we should be putting them into the mainstream in training employees. And that has to be done, a lot of user testing, a lot of assimilation of the knowledge part, even from existing users who are finding it a success. So I would recommend strongly to have champions who will be believing in it, who will be embracing the technology faster, who can be the early adopters and who can be influencers. They can then influence a bigger population all around. Using this, I think we should be able to make a big penetration. But again, overall, like I mentioned in the last point as well, for me, success of this also comes down to the leadership showing a lot of empathy and concern. If people aren't able to understand things properly and adapting things properly, the very easy way is to go aggressive on them and really, have some tough conversations. But if we have empathetic leaders who can actually understand the problems and handhold certain people, then I think the adoption can be much more easier and there'll be a more positive environment. But let me tell you from my own experience, the biggest challenge has been data migration. I think we need to give very, very important focus to make sure that the right data is being migrated and we are able to make sure that systems are working properly before we go live on anything. Consistently, organizations continue to make a mistake of rolling out things and then it's a complete mess. And after that, it becomes very difficult to manage. Thank you so much and appreciate the question as well.
No, thanks, Ashok, for sharing. And I think last comments, Kush, that I wanted to ask you again, reams of data that now are getting captured, right? I think Heathrow data points that were never captured in a company on account of the sheer number of digital applications that exist, they're getting captured. So how do you think, so it's like you're now sitting on a gold mine, you have all this gold, it's important to start mining it, right? How can companies, do you think, start leveraging these data sets powerfully to drive outcomes? Last comments on this and maybe we'll call the session.
I'll keep it very short because the answer to this, in my view, is slightly provocative maybe, but also, but I'll keep it very short. This notion that data, it's very valuable and all of that, and there's a lot of data, etc., is a notion that my sense has been, it's a little bit like those ghost stories or mythology.
Okay.
Have a vision that there is some big thing out there, etc. By the way, it's true for people who really use it well. It is actually true, and there are great examples of people who have done amazing things with it. People like what Amazon, for instance, does with data. It's mind blowing, right? Or even a Spotify, combining how they combine data and AI with human intelligence is spectacular. But my sense is that this is an irrelevant thing for most companies, and trying to invest behind some big infrastructure to bring data together, and this data lake, the data pond, the data ocean, it's great. I mean, it's the lovely concepts, but they can be nice projects. You can spend a lot of money on them and all that. But if you go from transformation back and you say, what do I need to enable this transformation? And then you figure out what is the data you need, what is the, you need to build an AI to do pricing on supply. We've helped one client with a B2B pricing. B2B pricing is very, very complex, right? You have to take into nuances of the customer, the history, importance, etc. To be able to do that with an AI-based tool for 70-80% of deals is quite spectacular. Then you pull the data together for that you need. You don't have to pull all the company's data together for that. Or you want to do predictive, analysis on failures, for instance. You need a particular type of data for that. You don't need to pull all the company's data together to do that, right? So if you go transformation case back and then you collect the data and you create the enabling structures for that, my sense is that is the way to go. And that's how you also ensure return on some of this investment. If at the end of this, you end up with many of these ponds and you need to connect them with some lake, etc., and ocean, that's a different thing. But, we are far from that, right? And it's a little bit like the Fitbit or the treadmill analogy. Creating it is not going to lead to any transformation or use of it, right? It has to come from use back. That's at least the way we approach these things mostly.
I think Matthew called it out as well. Thanks, Kush, for sharing. And I think with that, I think we are at the end of time. So thanks so much, Kush, Matthew, and Ashok for making time. I took personally a lot of takeaways from this. I think the audience did as well. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. You have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.